He suspected his maid was betraying him. For 3 weeks, he watched her slip through the gates at midnight with trembling hands. So one night, the vampire king followed her into the streets, ready to catch her selling his secrets. What he discovered in a checkout line at 2 a.m. didn't just leave him speechless. It shattered him. Ronan Mornvale was ancient, powerful, and owned the city's skyline. He noticed everything, every shadow, every whisper, every breath that didn't belong, except the woman who cleaned his marble floors. Her name was Sophia Reynolds. She'd been with his estate for 11 months. Quiet, efficient, eyes always down. She polished to silver, dusted his ancient portraits, scrubbed blood from his feeding chambers without a single question. She was perfect, invisible, exactly what he required. But Ronan never asked about her life. Never wondered why her uniform hung loose on her frame. Never noticed the dark circles carved beneath her eyes. She was simply there, a ghost in red and white, faithful and forgettable. Until 3 weeks ago, Ronan noticed Sophia slipping through the manor gates at midnight. Not leaving for the night, escaping. Her hands empty, her pace frantic, vanishing into the most dangerous parts of the city. Hours would pass. She never returned until dawn, stumbling back through the servants' entrance with exhaustion written across her face like a death sentence. His predatory instincts flared.
She's stealing something.
He swept through his estate with supernatural precision. His heirlooms, his artifacts, his blood reserves. Nothing missing. But she kept disappearing every night, and the suspicion burned in his immortal veins. What is she hiding? The Mornvale estate sprawled across 14 acres of manicured darkness, like a sleeping beast. Marble imported from Carrara. Chandeliers dripping with crystals older than most nations. Silk wallpaper hand-painted by artisans who'd been dead for 2 centuries. Every surface gleamed with the kind of shine that only comes from obsessive, relentless care. Every shadow had been calculated for maximum drama. Every room whispered of wealth so ancient it had forgotten its own origin. It was a mausoleum pretending to be a home. And there was no kitchen. Not a real one. The space that bore the name existed purely for show, a monument to aesthetics rather than function. Black granite countertops stretched beneath windows that never saw daylight, their surface so flawless they reflected the moon like still water. A sub-zero refrigerator hummed in the corner, its stainless steel belly completely empty except for a single shelf of blood bags marked with dates and types. The 6-burner gas stove had never felt flame. The double oven had never known heat. Cabinets, lined with hand-blown crystal decanters, held wine that would stop a human heart in 3 swallows. Why would Ronan Mornvale need a functioning kitchen? He did not eat.
He fed.
And feeding required no preparation, no recipes, no warmth. Just hunger and opportunity, and the iron will to control both. There was no pantry, no bread box gathering crumbs, no fruit bowl centerpiece rotting gently on the counter. The wine cellar 3 floors below contained 30,000 bottles spanning 4 centuries, but not a single one was meant for mortal lips. The formal dining room, a cathedral of mahogany and gold leaf, had hosted exactly 0 meals in the last 100 years. The table existed purely as a reminder. Ronan could afford things he would never use. The 16 chairs had never been sat in. The china had never been touched by food. Luxury in the Mornvale estate was measured by its uselessness. Sophia moved through this temple of beautiful emptiness like a shadow given reluctant form. She polished silver that would never touch food, dusted china that would never hold a meal, vacuumed carpets in rooms no one entered, scrubbed floors that only ever felt the weight of the dead. Her uniform, that red dress with its white apron and collar, was the only spot of warmth in a house built for things that no longer needed warmth to survive. Ronan watched her sometimes from the upper gallery, a pale specter observing another ghost. She was efficient, thorough,
Silent.
her heartbeat steady as she worked, a metronome of mortality in his marble tomb, the only proof that something living still existed within these walls. It never occurred to him to wonder what she ate, where she ate, if she ate. She was staff. Staff didn't require consideration beyond their paycheck and their silence. But for 3 weeks now, that steady heartbeat had begun to spike with fear. Every night at midnight, like a curse she couldn't break. Her pulse hammering. Terror sent rolling off her skin as she slipped toward the gates and disappeared into the city's most dangerous shadows. And Ronan's patience, 5 centuries in the making, was finally running out. Tonight he would follow. Tonight, he would discover what his perfect, invisible maid was hiding. Tonight, the hunt began. Midnight came like a held breath. Ronan stood in the shadows of the East Wing, perfectly still, perfectly silent, as Sophia finished her final task of the evening. She moved through the grand foyer with her cleaning caddy, returning it to the servant's closet with trembling hands. Her heartbeat was already accelerating. Her scent had changed, fear and determination mixed into something sharp and acidic. She didn't go to the servants' quarters to sleep. Instead, she grabbed her thin jacket from a hook near the kitchen and moved toward the side entrance with quick, furtive steps. Her eyes darted to the windows, to the shadows, checking to see if anyone was watching. Ronan smiled without warmth. "I'm always watching." She slipped through the gates at 12:17 a.m. exactly, her breath misting in the October cold. And Ronan followed. He moved like smoke given will. Supernatural speed carried him across the estate grounds in seconds, his footfalls making no sound on the gravel drive. He kept to the shadows, not that it mattered. Sophia never looked back. She was too focused on moving forward, her pace frantic, almost desperate. She walked. She didn't call a car, didn't head toward the staff parking area where a vehicle might wait. She simply walked, her thin jacket doing nothing against the wind, her worn shoes splashing through puddles left by the afternoon rain. She doesn't even own a car, Ronan realized with distant surprise. How did I not know that? Because he'd never asked, never cared. The neighborhood changed within 6 blocks. Manicured lawns gave way to cracked sidewalks. Elegant streetlights became flickering fluorescents. The scent of the city grew thicker. Exhaust, garbage, desperation. Sophia pulled her jacket tighter and walked faster, her head down, trying to make herself invisible. Ronan tracked her from the rooftops now, his pale form a blur against the night sky. Below him, the streets were dangerous. He could smell it, the predators, both human and otherwise. A group of men drinking outside a shuttered liquor store watched Sophia pass with hungry eyes. A car slowed beside her, the driver saying something that made her quicken her pace. She was utterly vulnerable, mortal, breakable. Why would she come here alone? His suspicion warred with confusion. What could possibly be worth this risk? If she was meeting with a rival coven, they'd chosen the perfect location, chaotic, unpredictable, full of witnesses and noise. If she was selling his secrets, this was exactly the kind of place where information brokers thrived. Sophia turned down an even darker street, past boarded-up buildings and flickering neon signs advertising check-cashing services and 24-hour bail bonds. Ronan followed, a shadow among shadows, his predatory instincts sharp as broken glass. She was leading him somewhere specific. Somewhere she'd been before. And when she finally stopped walking, her destination made his 500-year-old heart stutter with incomprehension. A grocery store. Flickering lights. Half-empty parking lot. The saddest, most run-down building on the block. Sophia pulled open the door and disappeared inside. Ronan landed silently on the roof, his mind racing. A grocery store? What kind of betrayal happened at 2 a.m. in a grocery store? The grocery store was a fluorescent nightmare. Buzzing lights that flickered arrhythmically. Linoleum floors scarred with years of foot traffic and neglect. Half the shelves were empty or stocked with dented cans and products weeks past their prime. A tired cashier scrolled through her phone at the single open register, barely conscious. Ronan slipped through a maintenance entrance and scaled the interior supports in half a heartbeat, positioning himself in the shadows near the ceiling. From here, he could see everything. Every aisle. Every corner. Every person in this temple of mortal desperation. There were 4 other customers. A man in a security uniform buying energy drinks for a night shift. A teenager with hollow eyes scanning prices for the cheapest instant noodles. An elderly woman shuffling through the pharmacy section. And Sophia. She stood in the produce section, if it could be called that. Wilted lettuce in plastic containers. Bruised apples marked down for quick sale. Bread on a clearance rack with expiration dates already passed. Sophia held a basket in both hands, staring at the prices like they were written in a language she was still learning to read. Ronan watched, perfectly still, as she picked up a loaf of white bread.
Checked the price. Put it back.
Picked up a smaller loaf. Checked again. Her lips moved silently, calculating. She placed it carefully in her basket. Next, the lettuce. She examined 3 different containers, checking for brown spots, for freshness, for any sign that the food inside might last more than a day. She chose the least wilted option, added it to the basket with the reverence someone might show a religious artifact. Then she stood there, staring into her basket. Her hand drifted to her jacket pocket and emerged with a small zippered pouch. Ronan's supernatural vision caught every detail as she opened it.
Coins.
Mostly quarters and dimes. A few crumpled $1 bills. She counted them in her palm, her fingers shaking. Her lips moved again, whispering numbers only she could hear. She looked back at the lettuce, at the bread, at the pouch in her hand. Then she put the lettuce back. The movement was so defeated, so utterly devoid of hope, that something cold turned over in Ronan's chest. She kept the bread. Just the bread. She counted her coins one more time, as if hoping the total might have changed, then moved toward the register with her single item. This is what she risked her life for? A loaf of bread? There was no meeting. No shadowy figure waiting to exchange information. No bags full of stolen goods. Just a woman buying food with coins because she clearly didn't have enough for anything else. The cashier rang her up without looking at her. $2.47. Sophia counted out the exact change, down to the last penny, and placed it on the counter. She tucked the bread into her thin jacket to keep it dry and walked back out into the rain. Ronan followed, his mind spinning with questions that made no sense. She was his maid. He paid her. Not generously, perhaps, but enough to survive. Wasn't it? Ronan followed her back through the rain-slicked streets, his mind a tangle of confusion and something dangerously close to concern.
Bread.
She risked walking through one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city at 2 a.m. for a single loaf of bread. It made no sense. Sophia lived at the estate. She had access to. His thoughts stuttered to a halt. Access to what exactly? The servants' quarters were comfortable enough. Clean beds, private bathrooms, temperature-controlled rooms. He provided shelter. He provided safety. He provided a steady wage, perhaps not extravagant, but sufficient for someone of her position. So why was she counting coins for bread like a woman on the edge of starvation? She's being dramatic, he told himself, tracking her from the rooftops as she hurried through the empty streets. Or she has debts. Gambling, perhaps.
Drugs.
Some mortal vice that's draining her resources. But even as he thought it, he didn't believe it. Sophia's scent was clean.
No chemicals, no addiction markers.
Her heartbeat was steady except for the fear. And the way she'd looked at that bread, the reverence, the desperation, That wasn't the look of someone feeding a vice. That was the look of someone who is genuinely hungry. The thought lodged in his mind like a splinter. When was the last time I saw her eat? He'd never seen her eat. Not once in 11 months. But then again, why would he? Staff took their meals in their quarters, during their off hours, in spaces he never visited. It wasn't his concern. They were adults.
They fed themselves.
Fed themselves with what, exactly? The splinter dug deeper. Ronan's steps slowed as he replayed his estate in his mind. The empty kitchen. The decorative stove. The refrigerator containing only blood bags. The wine cellar full of poison. The dining room that had never served a meal. There was no pantry. No staff cafeteria.
No communal kitchen.
Nothing. He'd assumed, when he'd thought about it at all, which was never, that staff brought their own food, prepared their own meals, took care of their own mortal needs with their own mortal resources, because that was simply what mortals did. But Sophia worked 12-hour shifts.
6 days a week.
She arrived before dawn and left after dark. When exactly was she supposed to shop? When was she supposed to cook? And where, in his pristine, foodless estate, would she even prepare a meal? The realization hit him like sunlight. I haven't fed her. Not once. Not ever. He'd employed her for 11 months and provided her with exactly 0 sustenance. He paid her wages, barely enough to cover rent in the city, and expected those wages to stretch across food, transportation, clothing, and whatever other needs a mortal body required. Needs he hadn't considered in 500 years. He'd forgotten. Mortals needed to eat. Not once a week. Not occasionally. Every single day. Multiple times a day. Their bodies broke down without it. They weakened. They suffered. They starved. In his palace of marble and gold, surrounded by wealth that could feed 1,000 families, he had let his maid slowly waste away because it had never occurred to him that she might be hungry. Ahead of him, Sophia clutched her single loaf of bread tighter and disappeared around a corner. And Ronan, for the first time in centuries, felt something uncomfortably close to shame. The apartment building looked like it was holding itself upright through sheer stubbornness. Ronan perched on the fire escape of the adjacent structure, watching Sophia approach a 5-story brick building that should have been condemned decades ago. Graffiti covered the lower walls. Several windows were boarded up. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, the lock clearly broken. A pile of garbage bags sat decomposing on the sidewalk because the dumpster had been overflowing for what looked like weeks. This was where she lived. Sophia climbed the external stairs. The interior stairwell was apparently too dangerous or broken to use, clutching her bread like it might be stolen at any moment. 2nd floor. 3rd.
4th.
She stopped at a door with peeling green paint and missing numbers. Only the ghostly outline showed it had once been marked 4C. She pulled out a key, glanced over her shoulder one final time, and slipped inside. Ronan moved like water, flowing across the gap between buildings and positioning himself outside her window. The glass was so dirty he could barely see through it, one pane cracked and covered with duct tape to keep the cold out. It didn't work. He could feel the temperature from here. The apartment was freezing. His eyes adjusted, vampire vision cutting through the grime and darkness. The space was barely larger than his walk-in closet. A kitchenette with a hot plate and a mini fridge that rattled asthmatically. A futon that served as both couch and bed, covered with blankets that looked thin enough to be transparent. A small table with 2 mismatched chairs. Walls stained with water damage. Carpet worn down to the backing and paths between the rooms. And sitting at that table, bundled in a jacket and a blanket, was a child. A little girl. No more than 5 years old. Dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail. Enormous eyes that lit up the moment Sophia walked through the door.
Nana.
The child's voice was muffled through the window, but Ronan heard it clearly. She launched herself at Sophia, wrapping small arms around her mother's waist. Sophia dropped to her knees, clutching her daughter like she was the only real thing in the world. "Hey, baby. I'm sorry I'm late. Were you okay?" The little girl nodded, but Ronan saw the fear in her face, the relief. This child had been alone in this freezing apartment, in this dangerous building, while her mother walked through the night to buy bread. "I wasn't scared," the girl lied bravely. "Did you bring food?" Sophia's smile was heartbreaking. "I did." She pulled the loaf from her jacket like a magician revealing a prize. Fresh bread. The child's face transformed with joy. "Over bread, like it was a feast. Can I have some now?" "In the morning, sweetheart. It's almost 3. You need to sleep." "But I'm hungry." Sophia's expression cracked, just for a moment. "I know, baby. I know. Here." She tore off a small piece from the end of the loaf. "Just a little, to help you sleep." The girl ate it slowly, savoring every bite, while Sophia stroked her hair and whispered promises she clearly didn't know if she could keep. Ronan watched from the darkness outside, motionless as a statue. She was a mother, a single mother, based on the complete absence of anyone else. Working 12-hour days in his lifeless estate and coming home to this, to cold and hunger and a child who'd learned not to ask for too much. And suddenly, the mystery was no mystery at all. The child fell asleep within minutes, curled under every blanket they owned. Sophia tucked her in with practiced gentleness, then stood and moved to the kitchenette. Ronan shifted position, angling for a better view. She opened the mini-fridge, and the interior light revealed a wasteland. A half-gallon of milk with 2 days left before expiration. 3 eggs in a carton meant for 12. A single apple with a brown spot. Some wilted celery in the crisper drawer. That was it. That was everything. She placed the bread on the counter and pulled out a piece of paper that had been magnet to the fridge door. Even from outside, Ronan's supernatural vision could read every word. It was a budget, written in Sophia's careful handwriting. November. Rent, $950. Electricity, $80, past due. Childcare, half days $320. Bus pass, $75. Phone, prepaid $40. Total, $1,465. Below that, in different ink, like she'd added it later, wage from Mornvale Estate, $1,400 per month. Ronan's breath stopped. He paid her $1,400 a month. For 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. He'd never calculated the hourly rate. Why would he? But now the math screamed at him. Roughly 72 hours a week. 28 days a month. Just under $5 per hour. $5. For cleaning blood from his feeding chambers. For polishing silver in a house full of monsters. For scrubbing floors in a tomb while her own child sat alone in the freezing dark. And her expenses exceeded her income by $65. Before food. Before clothing. Before anything unexpected. His eyes tracked to the pile of envelopes on the counter. One had been opened, the contents visible. A disconnection notice for electricity. Another was stamped final notice in red letters. A third was from the child care center, requesting payment or her daughter would lose her spot. Sophia stared at the budget sheet for a long moment, then folded it carefully and put it back on the fridge. She opened a cabinet above the sink, the only cabinet in the entire kitchenette, and pulled out a jar. A mayonnaise jar, repurposed, with Emma School written on masking tape. Inside were coins. Mostly pennies and nickels. She counted out 6 quarters from her jacket pocket, the change she must have had left over, and dropped them into the jar. They clinked hollowly against the bottom. Maybe $3 total in there. For school. for whatever future she was desperately trying to build from coins and willpower. Then she sat down at the table, put her head in her hands, and wept.
Silently.
Tears streaming down her face, shoulders shaking, but making no sound. She'd trained herself not to wake her daughter. Even her grief had to be quiet, had to be invisible. Ronan watched from the cold darkness, and for the first time in 500 years, he had no words. He was an ancient king. He owned half the city. His wine cellar alone was worth more than this entire building. He could buy a car with the cash he kept in his desk drawer for incidentals. And his maid was rationing eggs while her daughter went to bed hungry because he'd never bothered to notice what survival actually cost. Speechless didn't begin to cover it. He felt shattered. Sophia arrived at the estate the next evening with dread coiled in her stomach like a serpent. Something was wrong. She could feel it the moment she stepped through the servants' entrance. The air felt different, charged, like the manor itself was holding its breath. She hung her jacket on the usual hook, her hands unsteady. She'd barely slept. 3 hours, maybe, before she had to wake Emma, get her to the neighbor's apartment, and catch the first bus back to this marble prison. Her body ached. Her eyes burned. But that was normal. That was every day. This feeling, this sense of being watched, being known, that was new. She picked up her cleaning caddy from the closet and turned toward the grand foyer. Sophia. The voice came from the kitchen. Her blood turned to ice. In 11 months, Ronan Mornvale had never spoken her name, had barely acknowledged her existence beyond the occasional nod or gesture. He was a shadow that moved through the estate while she cleaned, a presence she'd learned to navigate around like furniture. He certainly had never been in the kitchen. She forced her feet to move, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Was she fired? Had she missed something? Left a spot on the silver? Broken something without realizing? She stepped into the kitchen doorway and froze. Ronan stood near the counter, his tall frame impossibly still, his platinum hair catching the light like a crown. His pale hands were clasped behind his back. His expression was unreadable. And the kitchen, the beautiful, useless kitchen, was buried in grocery bags.
Dozens of them.
Brown paper bags covering every surface. The counters, the island, the table, overflowing with food. Real food. Bread and fruit and vegetables. Boxes of pasta. Jars of sauce. Fresh meat wrapped in butcher paper. Milk.
Eggs. Cheese.
Things Sophia hadn't seen in quantities like this since before Emma was born. Her brain struggled to process what she was seeing. "I've been informed," Ronan said slowly, his voice like gravel and silk, "that my estate has been lacking certain necessities." Sophia couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "You've been with me for 11 months. His eyes, those strange, ancient eyes, fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to run. "And in that time, I have failed to provide you with the most basic requirement for your survival." Oh God. He knew. Somehow he knew. "I don't." Her voice came out as a whisper. "I don't understand." "Food, Sophia." The words sounded foreign in his mouth. "You need food.
Daily.
Multiple times a day. And I have provided you with none." Her legs felt weak. "Sir, I never expected." "You shouldn't have to expect it. You shouldn't have to walk through the most dangerous part of the city at 2 a.m. to count coins for bread." The room tilted. He had followed her. He had seen her. Sophia's mind raced through 1,000 terrible possibilities. She'd broken the rules. Left the estate after dark. She was going to be fired. She'd lose this job, and then she'd lose the apartment, and then she'd lose Emma, and... "This is for you," Ronan continued, gesturing to the bags. "All of it. Take what you need. Tonight. And from now on, this kitchen will be stocked weekly. You will have access to anything you require." She stared at him, at the food, At him again. I can't pay for this. Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe. Or shame. You already have. Sophia stood frozen, her mind struggling to catch up with reality. The groceries. His words. The impossible knowledge he shouldn't have. You followed me. It wasn't a question. Her voice shook. You saw everything. Ronan's expression remained carefully neutral, but something moved behind his eyes. Something that looked almost human. I suspected you of betrayal. Espionage.
Theft.
For 3 weeks, I watched you leave and convinced myself you were selling my secrets to rival covens. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, bitter and half hysterical. Secrets? I don't even know what you are. I just clean the... She cut herself off, aware suddenly of how dangerous this conversation could become. You know exactly what I am. His voice was quiet. You've scrubbed my blood from silk sheets. Polished the chains in the cellar. You know, Sophia. You've simply been wise enough to stay silent. Her hands twisted together, knuckles white. Are you going to fire me? Fire you? He looked genuinely startled.
No.
I'm trying to apologize to you. The word hung in the air like a foreign object. Ronan moved closer, and Sophia's instinct screamed at her to back away, but she held her ground. He stopped a few feet from her, his pale hands unclenching, a gesture that seemed to cost him effort. I followed you through the city. I watched you count coins in a grocery store at 2 a.m. I followed you to an apartment that should be condemned, where your daughter... His voice caught, barely perceptible. Where your daughter was waiting, alone, in the cold and dark. Because you were here, working for me, for wages that don't even cover your rent. Tears burned in Sophia's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. I saw the budget on your refrigerator. I saw the disconnection notices. The jar labeled school, with $3 in coins. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something raw. I watched you give your daughter a piece of bread and tell her to make it last. And then I watched you sit at that table and weep because you believed she couldn't hear you. Please stop. The words escaped her as barely a whisper. I have lived for 5 centuries, Ronan continued, relentless now, like confession was a dam that had finally broken. I have commanded armies, toppled kingdoms, accumulated wealth that could feed entire nations. And I have been so utterly, incomprehensibly blind that I let a woman starve under my own roof because I forgot that mortality requires more than a paycheck and a place to sleep. He took a breath he didn't need, an old habit from a humanity long abandoned. I am offering you more than groceries, Sophia. I am offering you my protection. Real protection. His eyes met hers, and they were blazing with something fierce and ancient. Your wages are tripling, effective immediately. Your daughter will have the finest childcare this city offers. Your rent, your utilities, your debts, consider them handled. You will never count coins for bread again. You will never choose between electricity and food. You will never send your child to bed hungry while you pretend not to cry. Sophia's tears spilled over despite her best efforts.
Why?
Why would you do this? Because I saw you. The simplicity of it was devastating. For 11 months, you were invisible. Furniture. A function. And then I followed you, expecting to find a traitor, and instead I found a woman fighting a war I didn't even know existed. You showed me what survival looks like when power refuses to see suffering. He extended his hand, palm up. An invitation, not a command. Let me see you now. Let me protect what I should have valued from the beginning. Not as a servant, as someone under my care. Sophia stared at his outstretched hand, at the monster offering salvation, at the king who had finally learned to notice the invisible. And slowly, trembling, she placed her hand in his. The transformation began at dawn. Ronan worked through the day, something he hadn't done in decades, sealed in his private chambers while contractors and designers moved through the estate like a purposeful invasion. By the time the sun set, the East Wing had been converted. Not redecorated. Converted into a space designed for the living. Floor-to-ceiling windows that actually opened to let in fresh air. Blackout curtains for sleeping, not for hiding from the sun. Radiators that pumped real heat. A bedroom for Sophia with a proper bed, not a servant's cot. And next to it, a smaller room painted soft yellow, filled with toys and books, and a child-sized bed with a canopy that looked like something from a fairy tale. Emma's room, in a vampire's estate. The kitchen had been gutted and rebuilt. A functioning stove. An oven that worked. A full-sized refrigerator already humming with fresh food. Cabinets stocked with spices and flour and sugar, and everything a human might need to actually cook. A table near the window where morning light would pool like liquid gold. When Sophia arrived that evening, exhausted from another shift, she found Ronan waiting at the servants' entrance with a car idling behind him. "Get your daughter," he said simply. "You're both moving in tonight." She'd stared at him. "Sir, I can't possibly." "You can. And you will." His tone left no room for argument. "The East Wing is yours. Furnished, heated, safe. Emma will have her own room. You'll have privacy.
Space.
Everything you need. I'm your maid. You were my maid." He opened the car door. "Now you're under my protection. The title can be whatever makes you comfortable. Household manager. Estate coordinator. I don't care. But you will not scrub floors anymore. And your daughter will not spend another night alone in that freezing apartment." The car ride to her building was silent. Ronan waited outside while Sophia packed their life into 3 garbage bags and 1 battered suitcase. Emma clutched a stuffed rabbit and stared at the pale man with wide, curious eyes. "Are you a prince?" the little girl whispered. Ronan looked at her, really looked at her, and something ancient and frozen in his chest cracked further. "Something like that," he murmured. Emma smiled. "Mama said princes are only in stories. Your mother is usually right, but sometimes stories find us anyway." The East Wing became a home within days. Emma's laughter echoed through halls that had only ever known silence. Sophia cooked meals in the kitchen, real meals, filling the manor with scents Ronan hadn't experienced in centuries. Garlic and rosemary, fresh bread baking, tomato sauce simmering, the smell of life. He found it didn't repel him. It anchored him. But the transformation didn't stop at his gates. Ronan began to notice. The night watchman who worked 3 jobs. The landscaper who slept in his truck. The part-time housekeeper who wore the same worn shoes every shift. He saw them now. Saw their exhaustion. Their quiet desperation. The invisible weight of survival. Wages doubled across his estate. Then tripled. Health insurance appeared. Childcare stipends. Housing allowances. The staff who'd been furniture suddenly became people, and Ronan made sure they knew it. Word spread through the supernatural community. The Mornvale king had gone soft.
Weak.
Sentimental. Let them think it. Ronan didn't care. He'd spent 500 years accumulating power and using it for nothing but his own isolation. Now, that power had a purpose. Protection. Provision. The radical act of seeing suffering and choosing to end it. One evening, 3 months after Sophia and Emma moved in, Ronan found himself standing in the kitchen doorway. Emma sat at the table doing homework, her tongue poking out in concentration. Sophia stirred something on the stove, humming softly. Warm light. Warm smells. The sound of a child's pencil scratching paper. Life. In his tomb. Emma looked up and spotted him. "Mr. Ronan, Mama made soup. Do you want some?" He almost said no. Almost retreated to his chambers, to his blood wine and his comfortable darkness. But Sophia turned from the stove and smiled at him. A real smile. Not the fearful deference of a servant, but the grateful warmth of someone who'd been drowning and found solid ground. "There's plenty," she said softly. Ronan couldn't eat it. His body would reject it. But he sat at the table anyway, watching Emma slurp her soup and chatter about her new school, listening to Sophia talk about the menu she was planning for the week. And for the first time in 5 centuries, the Vampire King understood what it meant to be wealthy. Not in gold, not in power. In this. In the protection of those who needed it. In the simple act of ensuring that no one under his roof ever went hungry again. True power, he'd finally learned, wasn't found in blood. It was found in the choice to shelter life instead of consuming it. The reign had changed. And so had the king. If this story reminded you that everyone deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be protected, then let us see you. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe so we can keep telling stories where power chooses compassion over cruelty. Thanks for watching.